some games. And this, Yaz, is a very aggressive plan.
And there's a very clear threat in the position, actually, f5, f4, f3 to force a pawn breakthrough. Magnus has to be careful now. Maybe it's time to rein in the horns and play king d1 and king e2 and get the king back into the action, because that's a very clear threat of f4 and f3. After playing f4, if you capture on g4, then rook takes g4, and that pawn on g2 is toast. So that's why I'm saying it may be time for Magnus to say, okay, I'm doing nothing. I'm going to bring my king back over to the king side and try to, well, defend.
I mean, we were under the illusion maybe that, and he did play king d1, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
We were under the illusion that it was Magnus who may be playing for something. And that's, of course, again, it's like inertia. It's Magnus.
It's Magnus.
Therefore, he's the one who's pressing.
Right.
And Ding, we saw him play that majestic game in the Chinese Chess League, one of the greatest games ever played. And f4 has been played on the board. As you mentioned, king d1, f4 now on the board.
King e2, f3, king f1.
And we haven't seen a move just yet. We're expecting to see something by Magnus to curtail the hyper-aggressiveness of this player. Ding, Ding, that game he played was so magnificent, was so beautiful, it was incredible. The attack without a queen, rook d4, will ring in history forever, and especially if he proves that he is a potential candidate after the candidates tournament. He's already clearly a potential candidate. He is a candidate, in fact, but a challenger to Magnus. If he shows his stuff now, everybody will be talking about this young man.
Absolutely.
That's right. This is such an important match for him. And don't forget, we have two other players in this competition who are also candidates. Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So. So along with Ding Liren and Magnus Carlsen, we've got a pretty good chance of having the next world champion in the room as well.
Exactly.
And the next world championship challenger.
And the other two candidates to be determined is going to be coming from the FIDE Grand Prix. There at the moment, Shaq is leading. MVL is in the mix. I think Grishuk as well is in the mix.
By the way, there's danger in this position. This position on the board. If you play the king f1 move, and Magnus might be realizing it now in this sequence, after f4, king e2, f3, king f1, g takes h3, g takes h3, the game can switch back to this move, rook to b8, and now this rook is not only threatening to come down to b1 and just freeze everything on this side, it's also going to go to b3 and nibble on this pawn on d3. It is black with all the play here, and Magnus, you saw him get a little bit nervous, pick up a piece. It's a little tell.
Start that fiddling.
Yes, start to fidget. You know, you may want to make some chess fidget spinners, because chess players can be very nervous that way. And Magnus made sure he did not play king to e2. Instead, he played f3 to shut down the further expansion on that side, as it's black, who now also, by the way,
rook G3
has got to be considering the move rook G3 as.
Oh, big time.
And I mean, that looks like pawns might drop. What's black's fear here of counterplay from white? How does white stop losing material?
You ask a very good question.
We have to play we have to go
rook
for some
G3.
tactics, maybe d4 and c5 and d6.
Wow.
d4 and just give up a whole slew of pawns, huh? Yeah. Well, on the other hand, force measures call for desperate actions, and d4, that's quite a shot. Taking advantage of the pinned bishop on e7.
So if the point is if c takes d4, c5 takes on c5, d6.
Right.
Yeah, absolute breakthrough and the only chance.
Right.
But a great idea. That is exactly what Ding has to look at now, as he wants to play rook g3, but he knows Magnus has something prepared, and he doesn't want to just play this move.
So if we just stop that by getting the king, like king f6 or something.
He has checked instead.
He started to check.
To test
started with a check.
That king position. I'm not sure what exactly that does.
Well, if king e2, rook g2 check, the king would still be driven back to e1. We can always pick up the h3 pawn, I believe. But bishop e1 is what was played. Oops, where's my mouse? I'm trying to
so
find
bishop
my
e1 stopping rook g3.
Rook check, bishop, yes, because
Because-
now this pawn,
Oh, does it stop rook g3 though? A king, yes, because our king is close enough to stop the pawn and all
But
these
but now
variations, yeah.
the bishop on d2. When you played d4, you stopped pawn takes with the e pawn because you had bishop takes f4.
right.
But now
So you
if
think
you
H1.
play after rook h1, which has been played, now you can't play d4 because
he
he
takes
takes
d4.
takes d4 and you get nothing.
right,
takes
there's
d4.
no,
So it doesn't work anymore.
right.
Because of this bishop. And I think this bishop slip was a big mistake by Magnus, as now he just loses his pawn. And he did lose his pawn. Rook takes on h3. Suddenly he just lost the pawn.
Oh my.
Yeah, he played bishop e1 very quickly.
Very
But
quickly.
Was there another option? Maybe the rook coming over to, like, so if he played, where is he
Well,
supposed to put his king here?
Well, we had
King E2.
anticipated king e2. If you go after the pawn, that
still have
breakthrough
d4.
tactic
Still there.
that you mentioned is on tap with d4, and that would have given the world champion a lot of
chance.
counterplay.
Well, now he's in trouble.
But now, after bishop e1 walking into the pin, rook h1, there's no d4 counterplay.
There's no d4. And without the d4 move, you're just losing the pawn. And he did after king e2. Rook takes on h3
Has
was
been
played.
played.
That's just the pawn. There's no d4 move. And then bishop f2 was played. Now looking for some cheapos like bishop takes on c5 in the position. But black can just pin the bishop, maybe with rook to h2, and then look to h3 and start marching down the board.
Or move the king. I mean, we can also stop things with.
Well, why not move the rook though? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not get progress
Rook h2,
with your
yeah.
rook and then push your pawn and your? I mean, that looks big. By the way, another result, Wesley, and he's moved the king instead first, as you mentioned, Jen. But there have a result in Wesley and Dominguez, a draw. That's every draw brings Dominguez closer and closer to sealing that match completely. Although he already has a dominant edge, but this is the one we're interested in. Can Ding
Wow.
upset the world champion
in the
black.
first
In the
round
very
of the
first game
campaign
with black.
showdown.
Wow.
Well, his immortal game was also with black, so
And
this
wait
guy's
a
not
minute.
afraid of the black pieces.
Hold on, I just saw the move king f1, and as Magnus is offering up his f3 pawn as well.
What?
No.
Rook takes f3, king g2, and there's a bishop takes h4.
And there's a bishop takes h4. That king on f6 has created a tactical problem for black.
Right, he put his king maybe on the wrong square because
And that's why you
the
liked
h pawn is hanging with check.
Rook h2 so much, followed by h3.
Rook h2, h3 was
Right
dominant.
here.
Was dominant. If he had played this move, white gets
Oh my!
just about no counterplay. Let's take a look at this line. Rook h2, king f1, h3,
bishop h4.
bishop h4 must have been what he was afraid of here,
Exactly.
with good reason. But is it true? Rook check,
King up, staying in the
king to
stay.
f2, and now how do we queen? We can't.
How do we queen and
We do. We can move the rook away.
Just simply.
Play any rook. Play rook away. B1.
So you're threatening to play h2.
That's right. And if you
Yeah.
take on e7, just move the king,
Yeah,
and that's it.
exactly. And h2 is huge.
She's on its way.
Yeah.
Amazing.
What do we?
Straightforward win. Instead,
What's the current position on your
he's
board?
taken on f3. Instead, Magnus has now created a new position where he's back in business, and Ding, his win has slipped away with the king going to g2. Now, if he takes on this square, then suddenly bishop takes h4 check, and he picks off a piece. And so it looks as though he's
But
going to have
that's for a lot of pawns, though, right, Maurice?
No, it's
No?
only 2 pawns.
King f5, bishop
King f5, bishop takes. Your d6 pawn is
e4.
well, yeah. There is counterplay. There is
Yeah.
counterplay, but he does have a bishop and a rook and a passed pawn, and this one might drop and a check from behind.
Laughing and thinking
Besides that,
I mean, besides that, you're doing all right.
what have the Romans ever done for us?
Yeah, well, that I'm sorry, you don't want to go into. A bishop takes on h4 will happen. So it looks as though in this position, he did let this slip. Magnus is going to breathe a giant sigh of relief, and it may be necessary right now
Just to give the
to
exchange.
play either rook takes or rook on g3, one of these two moves.
Rook G3,
to decide
yeah.
on. Rook g3 makes a lot of sense, in which case Magnus will not be able to win this position, as he's going to be forced to defend against these passed pawns.
And he has done it.
He did play rook g3.
Let's move over Veselin to Pala in a dominating position against Hikaru Nakamura, and it looks like that game has just finishing Yasser. Let's take a look at how that happened, as we've seen Nakamura and Veselin play such dazzling contests. And
the game was over.
Could you explain why it was so over?
Well, in this position here, we were talking about the extra pawn, and pass pawns must be pushed, and also don't put your king in front of skewers. That's a little cheeky way of saying king f6 should not have been played in this position. Rook h2, on the other hand, he must have seen rook h2. I guarantee he saw rook h2, and he thought, after I move my king, though, pawn up, and this bishop h4 is on the board. The problem is that bishop h4 doesn't work after check, king up, and then the rook just moves away. And you can donate this bishop to the cause, because after a king move, there's just no way to construct anything to stop, thanks to this f4 pawn, no way to stop this pawn from advancing. So, yes, there's no defense to rook h2. Rook h2 here, push, and you're just in deep trouble. Everything's going to have to go passive. This pawn is just so strong. And then you can solve this problem later. For example, a move like this one, check, the Indians give king h1, of course losing, so king f1, rook back, and again, this pawn is going down the board. I mean, it just, what do you do? What do you do? It was just that powerful, but he had to realize that he could give away his bishop and his pawn was simply queening. And that's an unusual construction, but something that he could have seen.
Yeah. And let's just take a look in instant replay, the fatal mistake. This was it, the king f6 that tosses away the win.
The commentator's cursed because I mentioned this move. And then it was instantly played.
I mentioned the other move, and they heard your lovely voice and said, let's do hers.
I'm still annoyed that I didn't see the mate in 29. I thought it was late in 24.
Keep training, yes.
Keep training.